My Gavan and Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm AZAGHAL'S, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome finally to another top 10 video. Today, dealing with Strike or Shock Infantry. Now, a brief description. Strike or Shock Infantry is essentially the infantry that one would use if you do not have cavalry available. It performs an identical function to cavalry, it just happens to be a little less mobile. This, generally speaking, is any two-handed unit. So whether it uses a two-handed axe, sword, glaive, you name it, that's usually a Shock Infantry. They're often defined by their lack of shield, high speed, generally armor piercing, and overall high offensive capability. Now that doesn't strictly limit it to two-handed sword, and there was a couple of units that we tested, or I tested, where they had a weapon in each hand. But the point remains, it is an aggressive infantry unit that you use to flank the enemy, hit them in the back, hit them in the side, get them to rout and run away. Therefore, in order to compile this test, I thought it was not worth putting them against one another, because you don't use strike infantry against one another. You use it like you use cavalry. So the test today was each unit was pitted against one unit that was used that was the same throughout. Of course, you've got to keep your variables the same, and I threw the strike infantry against that one unit for 40 seconds, and I tallied how many kills they got and how many deaths they took. The unit that I chose as our stalwart defender today were the WATCHMEN SWORDGUARD from Bree, upgraded with their full armor stat to try and give the armor piercing units a bit more to sink their axes into. And I repeated the test 3 times for each unit, so we've got 3 sets, and then I took an average, and then that is how we have arrived at the list. However, there is significant difference between the top kills in those 40 seconds and the top kill-death ratio in those 40 seconds. And so I will give you both lists, because it absolutely blew my mind how certain units are fantastic at killing the enemy, but they're absolutely also fantastic at dying. So there's 2 sets of lists really, but in terms of the raw, just how much damage output can you get from the units, that's what we're really looking for. So the first list will be given more attention and more time spent on it, and the second one is just a bit of an afterthought. So the rules, as I say, is that I controlled the defending unit, because otherwise they kept running away and it was really annoying. So I had the defending unit and the AI just attacked me. I started the timer as soon as the 2 lines met, and I stopped it at 40 seconds. I repeated that 3 times. Certain units had a throwing weapon as well, and so for those, what I did is I had 2 units. I allowed the enemy to waste all of their thrown shots on the first unit, then I ran that one out of the way quickly, and then they attacked in melee to the second unit. But it makes very little difference, I'm afraid, because I don't think any of the throwing units actually made it into the top spots, apart from 1. So it made very little difference in any event. But the rules have been set up and tested as in that regard. Now, if you are interested, the bar today, unfortunately, was set by the Dale Sword Masters, who got far and away the worst average kills, with only 20 kills in 40 seconds was their average, and their average deaths, sadly, were 23. So the Dale Swordmasters hold everybody else up. So that's the numbers we're working with. 20 was the lowest of the 29 shock infantry that I tested. Any unit that stats were quite obviously worse than Dale Swordmasters, I didn't bother testing, because if they're not going to make it on the list, there's no point in me testing for hours on end when that information is not even going to come to you anyway. So as I say, the bar is Dale Swordmasters. Right, and without any further ado then, let us move into the list. So at number 10, in top kills only, deaths only come into this first list if there are 2 units on the same number, which we happen to actually start with. So at number 10, it's Khan's WARLORD'S Guard, which I'm sure many of you are quite surprised to learn, because Khan, of course, are famed for their cavalry and not for their infantry, but there they are at number 10. Now you can see that they're effective against armor and they inspire themselves, which helps a little, but it doesn't really improve their combat stats. Really, it's just a nice attack of 9. They've got a fairly high charge bonus of 7, which helps a lot. And the defense of 20 allows them to at least survive for a little while. But that being said, the Warlord's Guard lost 14 men in the 40 seconds on average, with 36 kills on average. Moving on to number 9 then is a unit that many people may be perhaps shocked to learn, is the BARROW-WIGHTS of Angmar. Now, again, they're effective against armor, but they only wield a sword. They don't have an axe. They frighten the enemy, though, which I think possibly has some bearing. But again, really, this time it comes from their very high attack stats. You can see that their defense is roughly the same as the Warlord's Guard at 20. There may be differences between the armor and defense skill, but overall, and in melee, overall is all you're interested in. So their defense is the same. Their charge is lower, but their attack was better, and so that is why they come in. But do note, they actually also only got 36 kills. So the same as the Warlord's Guard, but they only lost 4 people. So that is how they come in at number 9, because they lost 10 less men than the Warlord's Guard. And then coming in at number 8, I need to stop saying coming in. At number 8 is the CARROCK Guard, Anduin's almost finest. Now they inspire themselves again, and again they're effective against armor. They also have a slightly higher mass stat than you may possibly have been expecting, which obviously is not written on the unit card. Their attack is 11 and their charge is 9, so they get a lot of damage in that instant hit, which is really good. Their defense is slightly higher and than the Warlord's Guard, which explains why they lost less men, because 11 CARROCK Guard died in the test, but they killed 37 overall, so only 1 more on average than the 2 before them. And losing a lot less than the BARROW-WIGHTS, but of course the BARROW-WIGHTS have 2 hit points, so that is likely why they lost a lot less. Moving on to number 7 then, it's the MINAS ITHIL Guardians, Gondor and Dol Amroth's almost finest. And quite interesting that they've featured so high on the list when they aren't even armor piercing. They killed 37 units again, so the same as the CARROCK Guard, but they only lost 7 men. And that, of course, comes from, again, it's just purely higher total defense. Although I do believe that they have the same number of men as the CARROCK Guard, so there's nothing going on there. But the Guardians just have a higher defense. They have a 16 attack and an 8 charge, so for them the damage is coming from their attack. They're not getting as much of a bonus from their charge. But without armor piercing, it lets them down a little. If they had armor piercing, I think they would have featured much, much higher. Moving on, number 6 are the Trollmen Champions of the Deserts of Harad. Now, they don't throw any javelins, that's the Trollmen Hunters, so fortunately for these, it's just their 2-handed sword. They are effective against armor, and again, they frighten the enemy. They have a 13 attack, so again, even higher. Their charge is 9. Their defense at the first glance looks lower, but note, again, they've got 2 hit points, which explains why only 3 of them died. So they killed 39 of the enemy and only lost 3 of their own. So a very, very good showing from the Trollmen. Fantastic shock infantry. You'll actually get some of them out after the battle. So very, very good. At number 5 then, the highest billing for the High Elves. Finally a list that's not dominated by the High Elves. The Noldor veterans come in at number 5. 41 kills they got, and they only lost 4 of their number. Now, there's a few less of them. There's only 103 compared to, obviously, the ITHIL and CARROCK having around 125. But their attack is 18, and their charge is 10. That is phenomenally good. And most of their damage is done on that instant hit when they first attack the enemy. Now, they have a 25 defense as well, so again, they're holding on very well, which is why only 4 of them died, as I already mentioned. So a fantastic showing from the Noldor, the veterans of the First Age, the warriors of the High Elves, and the highest listing for the High Elves today. And moving on to number 4, this one is really surprising. It is Dunland's finest, the ISENMACH AXEMEN. They came in at number 4, would you believe? So the ISENMACH AXEMEN killed 43 of the Watchmen in the 40 seconds. But as you can already see on screen, they lost 33 of their own men in the fight. So in terms of raw damage, they're almost in the top 3 in the entire game. But you're paying for that dearly. Watchmen SWORDGUARD are a decidedly average unit. That's why I chose them. And to think that they killed almost as many of these as these killed of them is mind-blowing. Now, do note, however, the ISENMACH AXEMEN, they've got a relatively low attack, a relatively low charge compared to what we've already seen. Their defense is abysmal, which is why they're dying so much. They do frighten the enemy, and they are effective against armor, but the reason they got so many kills and they appear so high is because there are 166 of them. Almost everything else on this list is 120 or less. In fact, they all are 120 or less, bar possibly the Warlord's Guard. but these have 166, so there were just more of them to kill the enemy, and that is why they feature so highly. But with those 33 deaths, you can imagine what's going to happen when we see the kill-death ratio instead. But moving on into the top 3 then. First of all, many of you I expect will guess this, I have no doubt. It's the skin changes for Anduin, the absolute brutes that they are. Now, this is another classic tale of how they did so well. So 44 kills with only 7 deaths. But 7 deaths is actually quite high because they've only got 31 men in the battalion. So the fact that they're able to come in third shows that the attack of 24 with a charge of 9 really gives them punching power, despite the fact there's only 31 of them. So there's hardly any of these, and they still managed to lose 7. I mean, if we were doing the deaths proportionally to the battalion size, skin changes likely come at the bottom of the list, because 7 out of 30 is a huge proportion. So not great there. Their total offense is only 17, but again, note they have 2 hit points, so it at least allows them to live a little longer. If they didn't have those 2 hit points, they would be terrible. And yes, they'd kill quite a few, but they'd die almost straight away. You would likely see half their battalion have died today if they hadn't got those 2 hit points. They're again effective against armor, and they frighten the enemy, which is a trait we see a lot at the top. So before we get to number 2 and 1, I'm going to do the honourable mentions now, because why not? So starting at the bottom of the honourable mentions, if I may, it is the Iron Fist Hammers at number 13 from Erebor, or more specifically from the Orokani Foothills. So again, they're effective against armour. They have the slightly higher mass that dwarves have, but their charge is only 3, so they get almost no bonus from the charge at all, which means it's then just their attack of 11 and their total offense of 28. The total defense of 28 helps them greatly. They only lost 3 dwarves in the fight. Only 3 of their number died. They only killed 32 of the enemy though, and that likely comes down to the poor showing in the initial charge. And then their attack of 11 isn't fantastic, and also dwarves seem to suffer from being a bit slow in the battle. So if the test had gone on for maybe, if it had been how long does it take them to wipe out the unit, maybe the dwarves would have featured a little higher. But in terms of just those 40 seconds, which is, I submit, the time that you would charge your shock infantry in, let them fight a bit, and then pull them out, which is how you use them. That's why I did the test in that way, and they didn't show too well. So 32 kills, 3 deaths, number 13, the Iron Fist Hammers. Another honourable mention at number 12 were the Orc Avengers of Gundabad. They managed to kill 35 of the enemy, but they lost 12 of their own. Now again, they're effective against armor and they frighten the enemy. Their attack is 13 and their charge is 10, and their defense is 21, so I would have expected a better showing. And to be honest, I can't really tell you for why they didn't do better. Actually, if we break it down, in the first test I did with them, they killed 37 of the enemy, and then in the second test they killed 42, so we're looking at a much higher placing at the moment. They would have been 5th or 6th, but in the third test they only killed 27. So it could be something with the AI going on there, but unfortunately I have to take the data that I have before me, and as such they are bumped down on the list. But I think in truth they really should have placed. But it's just that sort of anomalous result where they got almost 10 less kills in one of their runs. But I didn't want to test it again. It already took about 3 hours to get this many. And I thought, sod it. So if you've got Orc Avengers, they're good, but they didn't place today. And then finally, I did wanted this unit to be a little higher, but the last honourable mention are the Maithori-Thewar of the Wood Elves. Effective against armour, 11 attack, 7 charge, but only a 16 defence. The Maithor killed 36 of the enemy, but they lost 22 of their own men, the second highest tally on this list of deaths, only losing to the ISENMACH, who lost 33 of their own number. So the Maithor-Thewar taking that 11th spot because they did average 36 kills, which is the same as the WARLORD'S Guard and the BARROW-WIGHTS, but of course because they lost 22 of themselves, they don't place. So then we come down to the top spot, and I'm sure many of you will be guessing these, but I expect that almost no one will guess the first entry, and you'll all be very surprised to learn that at number 2, it's the Hammers of Gundabad. The Dwarven elite unit that is available to all 3 factions if they capture Gundabad. The unit was deliberately made powerful because Gundabad is a rare claim for, well, certainly for Ered Luin and KHAZAD-DUM, but Erebor often do get there. They have a 15 total attack, they have a charge of 7, and their defense of 33 is what helps. Because they don't die, they are able to kill more men, is essentially why they do so well. They inspire themselves, they frighten the enemy, and they're effective against armor. And of course they have that slightly higher dwarven mass, which helps them push into the enemy unit. But again, I really would submit the reason they did so well is because their defense is so overwhelming that none of them died, so they're able to just keep outputting damage. They only lost one dwarf, and they killed 44 of the enemy, which is absolutely amazing. Now, the first entry also only lost one unit, but in truth, the Hammers of Gundabad, in the first test, 2 of them died. In the second test, 1 of them died. And then in the last test, none of them died. But the unit that actually won had a slightly worse. They had a 4/3 death instead of the slightly lower of the Gundabad, which is why we see a change in a moment. But the number 1 spot with 47 kills in the 40 seconds were the BELERIAND Honor Guard, a new unit that is going to be added in version 5. Well, it's already in the game, but it's not available publicly as of recording this video, which is the 31st of May 2020. And that is why many of you may not have guessed that unit. But the BELERIAND Honor Guard were absolutely monumental. They were so good. 47 average kills. They also actually got the highest total kill of any of the tests, which in one of their tests was 53 kills out of the I think there's 150 units in the Watchman Sword Guard, so they killed 1/3 of them in 40 seconds in one of their tests. Now, as I say, they only lost 1 man as well, but their top kills puts them at the top. They have an attack of 18, a charge of 10, and a defense of 40. They inspire themselves, they're effective against armor, and they frighten nearby enemies. So again, all 3 of those traits being seen more commonly on the top 10 units. But again, as I say, they only lost 1, and they killed 47. So taking the top spot in kills overall are the BELERIAND Honor Guard. But, as I've already just given the game away and mentioned, there's a bit of a change-up when we swap over to the top 10 in terms of kill-death ratio. And there is indeed quite the change-up. Oh, sorry, dropped my pen. So, what we will do is we will just run through the top 10 in reverse order as well, the top 10 on the KD. So, starting at number 10 in the kill-death ratio is a unit we have already seen. It's the MINAS ITHIL Guardians. So MINAS ITHIL Guardians getting a 5 kill-death ratio. So I will only ever name the number, so just to explain it, for those that don't know, I'm sure you all do, but a 5 means that they were able to kill 5 of the enemy for every 1 of themselves that died. So the MINAS ITHIL Guardians coming in at number 10. They killed 37 of the enemy, but they lost 7 of their own, so a 5 overall. Now they drop from 7th place. They were 7th in the previous list. They are now 10th in this list. So they're still placing, which makes them still a very good unit. Coming in at number 9 is the Skin Changers, as I'm sure many of you were aware because of the high number from before. So the Skin Changers were 3rd in the previous list. They managed to get a kill-death ratio of 7. They killed 44 of the enemy and they lost 7 of themselves. So that pops them right down and they come in at number 9. Coming in at number 8 are the BARROW-WIGHTS. Now the BARROW-WIGHTS are the first to actually gain a place. They move up from 9th to 8th. They got a kill-death ratio of 8. With the BARROW-WIGHTS killing 36 and losing only 4 of them their own on average. So a good showing from the BARROW-WIGHTS and moving up a spot. Moving up then, it's the Iron Fist Hammers. Now this is the first unit that really jumps up. The Iron Fist Hammers were number 13 on the previous list. They were an honourable mention. They killed 32 enemies. They lost 3 of themselves, which gave them a 10 kill-death ratio on average. It's rounded. So they move up from 13th, as I say, to 7th, which is fantastic. And then next up, at number 6, are the NOLDOR veterans. Barely changing places, really. The NOLDOR dropped from 5th in the previous list. They had a kill-death ratio of 10 again. But the reason they beat the Iron Fists is because they killed 41. The Iron Fists only killed 32. But they have the similar sort of... they have the similar kill-death because 4 NOLDOR died. So it just makes sense. Then we move on to number 5. And number 5 is the Trollmen Champions. So they have moved up from 6th. So NOLDOR and Trollmen just sort of swap places. So the Trollmen moved up from 6th. They have a 15 kill-death ratio though. So a good 5 extra kills on the NOLDOR in terms of per deaths. 39 kills, 3 deaths for the Trollmen. A well-earned spot on 5th. And moving to 6th, this is perhaps the biggest shake-up of the entire video. It's fascinating. At number 4, are the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers. The KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers were the second worst unit tested in terms of top kills. They only killed 21 of the 150 Watchmen Swordguard in 40 seconds. That is only 1 kill on average more than the Dale Swordmasters. But the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers only lost 1 man on average in the testing. So their kill-death ratio was absolutely fantastic. Their KD was 16 overall. And as I say, their average kills was 21, but their average death was, rounded it's 1, but it gives a total of 16 because they lost 1 man in 2 tests and 2 men in another test, which is obviously 1.5 as an average. So that's why it comes out about 16. So the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers jumping up from 28th to 4th, which is fantastic. If you are wondering, the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers killed about double that if you include their axes thrown first. So they killed as many men as they can kill in 40 seconds with 1 volley, with using up all of their axes. So it would have boosted them up a bit more. Right, and then another upset, a unit many of you may have thought to have seen already. Coming at number 3, are the Nazkai of Isengard. The Nazkai are a very small battalion size again. There's only 37 of these. They have 2 hit points again, 23 total defense, 14 melee attack, and a 12 charge. They inspire themselves, they frighten the enemy, they're effective against armor, and they are relentless. They cannot be staggered. And that is why they come in at number 3 in the kill-death ratio, because the Nazkai had a 22 kill-death ratio. They killed on average 29 enemy units, and again, they had a roughly kill-death ratio of, again, 1.5. So it sort of balances down to, well, it was a bit more than 1.5. They lost 3 men in the first test, 1 man in the next test, and no men in the last test. So 29 overall on the kills, the average kill-death ratio slightly above 1, which gives them a 22 overall. Now again, note that their bombs were nowhere near as effective. They killed many more men in the 40-second melee than they did with the bombs before they charged in. So they could do with perhaps being boosted a little bit. But 37 men in the battalion, still that's a fantastic showing from such a small unit size. I will give honourable mentions, but this time we'll do them after 1st and 2nd, because you can already guess it. 1st and 2nd just swap places. So the BELERIAND Honour Guard and the Hammers of GUNDABAD are still number 1 and 2, but this time the other way round. GUNDABAD lost 1 less man overall in the testing. So GUNDABAD's tests were 36 kills and 2 deaths, 46 kills and 1 death, 50 kills and no deaths, but the BELERIAND were 41 kills and 2 deaths, 53 kills and 2 deaths, and 46 and no deaths. So GUNDABAD lost 1 less dwarf, which puts them 1 above in the testing. So GUNDABAD were the best in terms of kill-death ratio, and BELERIAND Honour Guard were the best in terms of kills. Honourable mentions for kill-death ratio then. At number 13, dropping from 8th place, are the CARROCK Guard of Anduin, with a kill-death ratio, unfortunately, of only 3. They killed 37 units, but they lost on average 11 of their own, and with the averaging throughout the table, that came in as a 3 kill-death ratio. So dropping quite substantially, and almost not charting at all. At number 12, the second honourable mention, are again turning to the dwarves who have dominated this list, are AZAGHAL'S Tomb Protectors from Ered Luin. A fantastic looking unit, but unfortunately they didn't have the punching power to do what needed to be done. And AZAGHAL'S Tomb Protectors averaged 27 kills, but their death total was averaged at 6, which gave them roughly a 5 kill-death ratio. So again, just not quite good enough. However, number 11, and number 12 were actually tied on their kill-death ratio and their kills. So either one of these really could have taken it, but I wanted to drop the dwarves down and put them in their place. So in truth, and then at number 11, Mordor's Temple Wards take the 11th spot as the third and final honourable mention. They are, of course, the Dark Numenorians of Mordor and two-handed swordmen at that. Nothing particularly special about the Temple Wards, and hence why they didn't really chart. But then to actually get onto the kill-death ratio is pretty damn good. The Temple Wards killed 27, as I say again, and their deaths were roughly 6 again, but ever so slightly less than the Azaghal, thus giving them, whilst having a 5 KD, they slightly pipped them to the post in honourable mentions. Now, the other units that appeared on the original list, the ISENMACH Axemen, as you can expect, dropped to 24th from 4th place because they unfortunately lost so many men. With 43 kills and 33 deaths, they dropped right down the list. WARLORD'S Guard, who started us off today at number 10, dropped to 17th because they lost 14 of their own. ITHIL, one of the honourable mentions, they dropped to 21st, so a terrible showing there as well. They lost 22 of their own. And lastly, the AVENGERS, losing 12 of their own, dropped to 16th. So really, the undisputed best shock infantry are the Hammers of Gundabad and the BELERIAND Honour Guard. No matter how you test it, those two are the best. And of course, the BELERIAND Honour Guard is a new unit in version 5 added for the reclamation and defeat of the Ered Luin Balrog. And reclamation of KHAZAD-DUM. And they wield weapons and armor forged in the First Age, which is why we've made them as strong as we have made them. And because they also come in really late in the game. But before we end this nearly 25-minute video, there's just a moment to talk about the actual real winner of today. Because the real winner, in my eyes, were the WATCHMEN Sword Guard. Because a unit that blooming average managed to kill so many of these units designed specifically to kill WATCHMEN Sword Guard. And I thought that was absolutely amazing. And what I'm going to take away from this video is when I next play as Bree, one of my favourite factions, I'm going to honour these guys in every battle they ever fight. Because damn did they impress today, and a fantastic unit that I expected to capitulate almost every single time. But there we are. That concludes, finally, the shock infantry of Divide and Conquer and which units you should be training. And no surprises really, apart from, to my mind, the Dunland. ISENMACH Axemen placing so high was really, really interesting to me. But if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. I did test almost every single strike infantry in the game. As I say though, if it didn't have stats as good as a Swordmaster, I didn't test it. And there were a couple of units in here that I tested that I thought would do well and were absolutely abysmal and barely even featured. So rest assured, I checked under every nook and cranny for our winner and we finally found them. So the Dwarves can hold their hammers high as the best shock infantry in Divide and Conquer. And that concludes the video, so until we speak again, dear friends, Navair Naden Perimad Melonin, and farewell.